Hello, everyone. So today we have an interview with the former press officer of the United Nations organization in New York, former resident senior officer in Belarus and Ukraine for the National Democratic Institute of International Affairs, a Fulbright Scholar Winner, and the writer who depicted the forced relocation of Poland's Ukrainians after World War II, Diana Howansky Reilly. We'll talk about her book Scattered that made people look at the post-World War II period from a different perspective, from a different point of view, and described really touching events that also happened to our common great-grandparents and grandparents and took place at the times of severe communist regimes of both the USSR and Poland. So, hey Diana, nice to see you. I haven't seen you for ages. How is your life? What's new?
I know, Marjan, it's been years since I think we've talked directly like this. Just like everybody else, we're just trying to survive the pandemic. My husband and I and my kids were all home. But luckily the kids are going back to school 5 days a week and things are good. I can't complain.
Oh, it's getting better and better, I think, yes, yeah. In the US with that.
Yes, more and more people vaccinated, more things are opening up, yes.
Yes, luckily we also left the red zone, I mean my city, Ivano-Frankivsk, so we are happy that some people can even go on a barbecue and walk in the park. So it's also getting better and better. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. And the first question to you, of course, about the book. And I would like to ask you, why did you decide to write the book Scattered? And what was the purpose of writing such, I would say, a tragic historical book about the relocation of Ukrainians from Polish territories?
Well, the book's all about the end of World War II and how the Polish communist government forcibly relocated hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, which including our family, my grandmother, your grandfather, from the Lemko region in southeastern Poland. And as somebody who was born in the United States and who never went through any sort of war, it was frankly shocking to me as I got older to learn about how our families were forced to basically pack up their homes and leave their villages and be relocated in boxcars across the country. That to me as an American was a foreign concept. And so I basically wanted to research it some more and to document the history and to document what happened to these people.
Mm-hmm. So was it difficult to collect all the materials? And is this rather a fiction book or historical? Is it entirely based on historical facts and the true story of our common ancestors, or there are some fiction facts?
No, it is completely historical, completely based on historical facts. I mean, that said, it's a narrative fiction, a nonfiction book. Narrative meaning that you learn the history through not sort of dry facts, but through what is hopefully a more interesting story to read, but everything is absolutely factual. And in terms of whether it was difficult to collect the material, it was a long process. I mean, it probably took me about 5 years in total in terms of researching and writing. I traveled around and I conducted a lot of interviews with dozens and dozens of people who lived through this forced relocation campaign, which was called Akcja Wisła in Polish, or Operation Vistula in English. And I also conducted a lot of research in the archives. So with all that information, I then sat down to write. So I wouldn't say it was difficult, but it was definitely time-consuming and laborious.
Mm-hmm. Did you travel to a lot of countries, to a lot of areas? I mean, like in Poland and Ukraine and all over the US, maybe?
Yes. When I was in Poland, I traveled to northern and western Poland, where a lot of these individuals were forcibly relocated. And I also traveled around the Lemko region in current-day southeastern Poland. Some people have gone back, but it's only a small minority of people. I traveled to Ukraine, both to eastern Ukraine, where, for example, your grandfather was deported in 1945, spent a lot of time in Western Ukraine as well, where some people like your grandfather eventually moved trying to get back closer to their homes, and ended up in Western Poland. And in the US, I conducted some interviews here, but I really wanted to focus on the individuals who were forcibly relocated and still living in those areas.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of Lemko communities remained in eastern part of Ukraine, correct?
Yes, around that region of Ilovaisk. Yes, they were sent there in 1944, 46, and many have remained to this day. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So you try to depict like a very true story, a better true story. I mean, of those events. I noticed because I read this book, and I was really excited by. I didn't know a lot of facts about this, about my relatives, my family. And have you ever been criticized for this book by Ukrainian or maybe Polish nationalists for depicting this better true story, how it was really like it was?
I haven't, by Ukrainian or the Polish side. I tried to be very balanced, very factual. And personally, when someone who is of Polish descent reads the book and gives me compliments about it, that pleases me, because you would think that a story about the Polish communist government forcibly relocating the Ukrainian minority might not be something that someone who's of Polish descent would want to read. But I've been told that it's balanced. Where I have gotten criticism is from the Carpatho-Rusin Society, or the Carpatho-Rusin community. Basically, they don't agree with my title, where I talk about the forced relocation of the Ukrainian minority. I've heard from various Rusins that they would prefer that it be Ukrainian and Rusin. But the argument that I always make back is that regardless of whether people, for example, in the Lemko region identified as Ukrainian or Rusin or just Lemko, the Polish communist government forcibly relocated them because it categorized these individuals as Ukrainian. So they were relocated because of a feeling that they were Ukrainian and therefore a possible threat.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. And as far as I know, you have a bachelor's degree in history from Columbia University, and you must be aware of the policies of the former USSR and Poland at those times. And how strong was the USSR propaganda and Polish terror against Ukrainian ethnic minorities? Do you think that these countries had the common goals, and do you think that they had an agreement to do like that, to force Ukrainians from their territories?
Yeah, I think that both the Polish government and the Soviet Union felt that Ukrainians who were vying for an independent Ukrainian state, that they were a threat. And Stalin's nationality policies, whether it was Ukrainians or others, was essentially to rid the Soviet Union of different nationalities. So from 1944 to 46, when the USSR and Poland agreed on this population exchange, Stalin and the Soviet Union was basically trying to get rid of the minorities, including the Ukrainian minority, sending Ukrainians, Belarusians, out of the Soviet Union. And on the flip side, I think the Polish government was trying to get rid of their Ukrainian minority. The USSR sent their Polish community and their Polish minority to Poland, and Poland sent its Ukrainian and Belarusians to Soviet Ukraine. So absolutely.
How cruel was it? Like, do you know any facts? Like, maybe you can portray those events. How cruel was it? Like, with those families, do they have any concentration camps? Because I read some concentration camps, and how much time do they give for people to pack all their clothes and to leave the territory? Do you know any facts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely varying levels of cruelty. There was a concentration camp called Jaworzno in the city of Jaworzno. And around 1947, during Operation Vistula, anyone who was considered to be sympathetic to Ukrainian nationalist or a Ukrainian nationalist was sent there. And I describe it in my book. My paternal grandfather, so not our side of the family, was sent to Yavozhna and spent about a year there. There were deaths there. While during Akcja Wisła, our family didn't necessarily undergo a lot of brutality when they were being relocated. There are many stories of deaths. So absolutely, people underwent very brutal conditions.
Mm-hmm. So could you explain to me how it happened that my grandfather, Petro Pertei, turned out to be in the USSR, and your grandmother, Melania, his sister, in the United States? Was it a common phenomenon for Levcom people to move to the United States at that time, or did they do it later, and maybe to other countries? And what is the biggest community of Lemko people? Where is the biggest community of Lemko people in the world? Lemko in the world.
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is when my family came to the U.S., which was in the 1960s, I don't think it was as common as before World War I. Up to World War I, it was very common for Lemkos to travel back and forth from the Lemko region, come to the U.S., make money, go back. I have, in my own family, on my mother's side, a lot of documentation of great-grandmother coming back and forth. Some of her kids were born in the U.S., some were born in the Lemko region. So it seemed a lot easier until World War I. In terms of your family versus mine, as I had mentioned, your grandfather was deported and your grandmother were deported to Eastern Ukraine in 1945. My grandmother...
Was he deported, or did he follow the Soviet propaganda that the USSR was such a beautiful country, and he believed in that myth, and he went to the USSR, and he was just prevented from going there, but he didn't follow anybody's advice. He just was really sure that life in the USSR was like a paradise, and then he came, and
you're right.
he was confused.
Yes. That's a great point, because in the beginning of this population exchange in 1944, there was a lot of propaganda and saying that this is a paradise, and I think that a lot of individuals, including your grandfather, believed that. They had no reason not to believe it. So in the beginning, for the first months or so, people voluntarily left, believing the propaganda. In terms of your grandfather, I think once they arrived and realized that that wasn't the case, and they had to work very hard on a collective farm, on a kolhosp, even though they were very intelligent, educated people, they tried to make their way back to their homes and couldn't then get across the border from Soviet Ukraine back to Poland. But as time passed in this population exchange, and there was more communication about what was taking place, less and less people were willing to take part in the population exchange, and then it became forced, and it became more brutal. So your grandfather ends up in Soviet Ukraine around 1945. My grandmother and their younger sister Hania stay in the Lemko region in southeastern Poland, and after the population exchange ends around 1946, there's still about 150,000 Ukrainians left in Poland. And because of its fear of Ukrainian nationalists creating an independent state, the Polish government then launches Operation Vistula. And since they couldn't get rid of their Ukrainian minority anymore by sending them to Soviet Ukraine, what they do is they forcibly relocate them to northern and western Poland, to territory that Poland got from Germany after World War II. So my grandmother, my grandfather, her younger sister Hania, and that entire side of the family ends up being sent to Western Poland. And then Stalin dies around 1953. President Gomulka comes into power in Poland about 1956, and there's a period of liberalization. So things open up a little bit, and by 1960s, my side of the family was able to emigrate through communication with other family members that had come to the U.S. before World War I. and they came to the U.S. And so that's how we've ended up in the U.S. Your family has stayed in Ukraine, and the descendants of the younger sister Hania have remained in Western Poland. So even though our families lived in a very compact community in the Lemko region for centuries, essentially, we've ended up in 3 different countries because of politics that, you know, nobody in our family had anything to do with.
I was always wondering why they were moved to the German border, to the Polish-German border. Were these territories so bad, or why did they move them to this kind of border? Do you know the answer to this question?
Yeah, I mean, the borders all shift after World War II. In Yalta, Churchill and Stalin and Roosevelt all meet, and I mean, it's a longer story, but basically, Roosevelt and Churchill capitulate to Stalin, and he's pushing for more territory. They give him up to what is called the Curzon Line, and in order to compensate Poland for this loss of its eastern territories, these allies basically give Poland Eastern Germany, part of Eastern Germany, and so all the borders shift west. And if anybody reads my books, there's some maps in there showing that. It's a little bit clearer. But so in terms of the German territory that Poland receives, Germans are forced to move out. This territory becomes emptier, and the Polish Communist government decides, well, we're going to populate this territory with these Ukrainians, or people that we consider to be a threat, and we're going to be spreading them out throughout Western and Northern Poland, these former German territories. And essentially that's where the title of my book comes from, Scattered, because they were scattered all around this territory and not allowed to form compact communities anymore.
Yeah. So as I already mentioned, it was pretty exciting for me to read this book, yes, and I highly recommend it for those who are really keen on history of World War II, post-war period, and family dramas, of course, yes, because there are many scenes of family dramas. And where can one buy this book? Is it on sale?
Yes, easiest way to do it is online. The publisher of the book is the University of Wisconsin Press, so you can absolutely buy it through them, through their website. Like most other things, you can get it on Amazon.com. If you just write Diana Howansky Reilly Scattered, it'll pop right up. It's also.
I've already put the link below in the description on YouTube, that everyone who wants to buy this book, you can do this. Like you can just go below this video and find the link. It's pretty clear, and you can find this book and buy if you are interested in this harsh times of World War II, of post World War II period, and if you are interested in history of the relocation of ethnic minorities who lived in the territory of Poland, you are welcome.
Thank you for letting people know.
So, Diana, if you don't mind, I'd like to switch the topic and speak about your activity in Belarus and Ukraine, yes, at the beginning of 2000s, yes. What did you do in Belarus and Ukraine and these harsh times, yes, and these regimes, I would say, and why did you decide to take such a high risk by monitoring political processes in these countries?
Well, I studied international affairs and got a master's degree at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And after I finished, I wanted to work in the nonprofit sector, and I went to work for a non-governmental organization, as you mentioned, National Democratic Institute, NDI. I started working for them in Washington, D.C., and then later went for a year to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and then a year in Ukraine working on our Belarus projects. And I mostly worked with election monitoring groups and groups that were advocating the government on various topics. So I worked with civil society. I basically, I guess, was motivated by the feeling that people should have the right to express their opinions to their government and to vote.
Hmm. I see. So, what challenges did you face? And well, you mentioned the purpose, probably, yeah. And did you want to change the existing political regimes, or you just monitored the situation?
Yeah, I mean, my role was to work with civil society, and the goal was for them to be able to express their opinions about who they wanted in their government. There are obviously many challenges. If you look back at the Belarus presidential elections of 2020, lots of mass protests, lots of arrests and beatings. So obviously there's still a huge problem in terms of the governments allowing their people to play a role in politics, and it continues to be a very authoritarian situation.
It's unbelievable what was happening, like with all this Lukashenko, and how he what crimes, real crimes he did against humanity, against his people in Belarus. It's unbelievable, and
Yeah,
these people are really peaceful, actually, and unfortunately, such regimes you cannot fight these regimes peacefully, because fortunately you have to somehow like you do it physically. That's
yeah,
what history says. Like, because I don't know such cases that like peacefully you can cope with this with such dictators as Lukashenko.
yeah. I mean, I was there in 2003, where it's now 2021, and the situation has not changed at all.
Yeah. So, what position did you have in the United Nations organization, and how did you manage to get a job there?
Well, my role was as a temporary press officer. So essentially, every year when the General Assembly meets and has various meetings with various committees, my role was to basically come in and report on all of those meetings. So from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., I'd be there listening and reporting on the meetings and writing press releases. And I think that in addition to my international affairs degree, I studied journalism. So with journalism and international affairs, I was just the right person, I think, or one of the right people to play a role in terms of covering the meetings.
I see. And as to your not job but scholarship, yes, you are also a Fulbright scholarship winner. And where did you go and what did you explore?
Well, I guess that loops back to our original conversation, which is that I was researching Operation Vistula, and I was based in Krakow at Jagiellonian University. But essentially, I would take my backpack and I would travel all around Poland looking for people who had lived through Operation Vistula and trying to record all their stories. So I've got dozens and dozens of these conversations on tape. And 1 year, thankfully, turned into 2 years of being able to do research.
So, what surprised you at that time, working with people and recording all these speeches? And maybe you worked in the Polish archives.
Yes, I did neglect to mention that I did some research in the archives of the Institute of National Remembrance, IPN, in Rzeszów in particular. I mean, everybody's stories were always surprising. And as a person who's trying to write about history, I was always wary about whether oral interviews were correct, whether people were remembering things properly. So, you mentioned the archives. It was interesting to me that I'd be able to cross-reference basically what people were telling me in their own stories with what was written in the archives. There are detailed Secret Service documents. And for example, I would interview my own grandmother and she would say something about, on this particular day, an event happened. And in the archives, I'd be able to confirm that indeed did happen. So that history is, as people are dying and less of this information is available, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in the archives. We can talk more about it, but I'm also a member of an organization that's called the the Organization for the Defense of Lemkivщина. And it's based here in the US. A lot of people who immigrated to the US from the Lemko region and want to promote the culture are members. And one of the things that we want to do next is to go into the archives and publish records of all the individuals who were forcibly relocated through Operation Vistula. There are books published of the names of people who were sent to Soviet Ukraine during the 1944-46 population exchange, but as of yet, there isn't a lot of documentation, in books and on paper of people who suffered during Operation Vistula, and generations want to find out what happened to their grandparents and their great-grandparents. So it's something that we hope to work on.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering what Polish authorities do with these people. Are those people who are responsible for such crimes alive, or like are they sued, or what is going on in Poland right now with this whole processes?
Well, I think a lot of people have passed away at this point. Anyone who is directly involved, and it would be a can of worms for the Polish government to address it. So up until this point, there's been a condemnation of it taking place, but there are no official reparations. Basically, if the Polish government were to give any sort of money to people who suffered through this, or giving them back their territory, you'd open up, maybe members of the Jewish community would then also be approaching them, or Germans who had been forcibly moved out of their territory. So it just there's a lot of interconnecting parts that would then need to be discussed. So not much is going on. Basically, is the short story.
Nowadays, it's possible to somehow return the territories if you have some documents. You can just go to the Polish court and you can sue, or you can do something with these territories. Yes.
It's difficult. It's not impossible. I write about it a little bit in the book. The younger sister of your grandfather and my grandmother, Hanya, did go through legal channels in order to try to get back the family's land. They weren't able to get back their exact land. As time has passed, all of these properties have moved into different hands. And so it's difficult to give somebody back their original land when somebody else is now living on it or has purchased it over the years. But what Hanya was able to receive from the government was some forest land. So she did get something back. It was through her own legal channels. Other people that I know have tried as well to go through legal channels, but it's a long process, and it's sort of ad hoc, where maybe it works for one person, but it doesn't work for the next. So there's no official sort of reparations or compensation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, Diana, so are you still following political process in Eastern European countries, in such countries as Ukraine, Russia, Belarus? And what do you think?
Loosely. As you know, I had a daughter that was born 9 years ago, and then a son that was born 7 years ago. So I haven't been back to Ukraine or Poland in the past 9 years. So while I follow, it's largely through news and secondhand sources. So I'm probably.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'm following loosely is basically what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. So what you follow? What positive and negative changes have you seen in Eastern Europe for the last time?
Well, not much has changed in some respects. What's disturbing is the war that's taking place in Eastern Ukraine. We were talking about how 9 years ago I was doing research in Ilovaisk, in the area where your grandfather was deported. A war is essentially taking place there now, funded by Russia. And it's, to me, extremely unfortunate that these same people who were deported there 75 years ago are now undergoing a war for, again, politics that they have nothing to do with. So that's unfortunate. On the flip side, what I am heartened by is that I see people in your political process like Sofia Fedina, one of your new parliamentarians, who also is Lemko, and they're vocal. So there's an active political life in Ukraine that I hope will continue.
Is Ukraine in the U.S. news very often?
Oh yeah, especially recently. I mean, for lots of different reasons. A lot of the talk about relations between Biden and or Paul Manafort. So yes, Ukraine is regularly in the news.
Maybe now it's like another topic. It's the tense of like really Russian troops on the border of Ukraine, and it's not only about Donbass or the Crimea. It's all around Ukrainian border, and it's a big concern and big warning, I must say, and nobody knows what will happen tomorrow.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the war within Ukraine is not publicized too much within U.S. news. Yeah, it's more sensational items like about Biden's family.
So could you please name 3 things that Ukraine should do to become a developed and prosperous country like the United States?
Well, not having been in Ukraine for the past 9 years, I am a little bit wary of kind of giving any sort of political advice. I guess what I can say is, even though in the U.S. we've had our own political challenges over the last period of time and issues with elections, we have a judicial process here where that has all played out. And I don't know that is the case in Ukraine. So, one of the things that's often talked about is a better judicial system in Ukraine. Because I don't feel like the right person to actually give advice about politics, I would say for people to, for example, follow Sofia Fedina and look at her Facebook page. I mean, she talks a lot about things that should be done to promote democracy and to deal with the issues in relation to Russia. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
I see. But still, 3 basic things. What do you think? How do you feel? Like, for your personal opinion, 3 basic things that Ukraine should do to become a developed country.
Well, we talked about improving the judicial system. I'll probably name the things that National Democratic Institute works on. Also working with political parties so that you've got a representation of political parties in parliament, and continuing to build up civil society so that people can express their opinions and vote and advocate their own government officials. I guess those would be the 3.
Election process is really important, because I'm just like an interpreter, and I can see all these drawbacks on the Ukrainian polling stations that should be definitely improved in terms of like elections. That's for sure, in terms of counting the votes. But still, things are slowly improving in our country, hopefully.
I hope so.
And okay, Diana, so the last question for you: what are your future plans in terms of writing books and monitoring political processes in developing countries? Do you have any? Do you want to continue?
I would love to. I think right now I'm focused on my family. I'm democracy building in my own family. We'll see what happens. I have some ideas for different books, but it really depends on whether I'll have time moving forward. I've sort of moved out of the world of non-governmental institutions for the moment, and currently work in the private sector for a commercial real estate company, which is a different world. But I still maintain a lot of ties with the Lemko community, and I but I volunteer for the Organization for the Defense of Lemkushina, and have recently been part of their editorial board. So we put out a magazine a few times a year that's called Lemkushina magazine. So I'm involved with curating articles and editing for that particular magazine. So right now, that's kind of where my focus is.
I see. I just want to mention about the book, Scattered, yes. And I also want to say that this interview is also devoted to my lovely sister, Virochka Velokoroda, who tragically died 3 years ago, and who translated the book Scattered into Ukrainian in 2017. I have this book here, and I want to show like our viewers about Розкидані долі. It's in Ukrainian. Yes, it's your book, Scattered, that was translated into Ukrainian. I must say that she was not a professional translator, but as I couldn't find a mistake, in this book, and it was really she was such a skillful. She turned out to be such a skillful translator of this book. So I just want to mention that if you want, you can contact me. You can get this book from me because it's not on sale. I'm not selling it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Market, if you don't mind me saying, I mean, I will forever be indebted to Vera for her work and her translation, and so respect the amount of work that she put into it. I mean, we would debate over, the smallest things, titles. I mean, she put so much heart into it in terms of it being published. For anybody who is interested, you can get it through the OOL website, www.lemco-ool.com, and we can make sure that it gets out there because she put so much effort to it.
Thanks a lot for mentioning this, and thanks a lot, Diana, for such an exciting and actually valuable interview. I'll leave the link in the description below again to your book, and everyone who is willing to buy it can do it.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your attention, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Markian.
Bye-bye.